Front-engine GT and sports cars are notorious for their high depreciation, costing owners tens and thousands of dollars. But at the same time, they can strike that sought-after balance between sportiness and comfort. In this video, I'll guide you through the cars you should steer clear of if you care about resale values, and those that should definitely be on your shortlist. The differences are enormous, but it's not just the unaffordable fancy stuff that has a low depreciation rate. On the contrary. Let's have a look at the data. That's what this channel is all about. We'll investigate the price trends for various models and aggregate them at the end of the video. We start with the Lexus LC500, a car that's fairly popular under the viewers. Over here we have the trend split by the coupes and the convertibles. Since the pandemic price top, prices have been decreasing. Moreover, they did so relatively quickly between the summer of 2022 and the beginning of 2024. This is similar to the rest of the market. What's unique though is what has been happening since 2024. Look at that, the depreciation curve flattened significantly. Coupes lost 1.2% and prices for the convertibles were basically flat. There are of course some differences between the various model years, but they are only small. But that's not all. Inventory data shows that these cars sell relatively quickly with a relatively low discount rate on unsold cars. I feel that many people are sleeping on the LC500. From a depreciation perspective, this seems like an excellent choice. We continue with the previous generation AMG GT. The base and S models are priced similar to the LC500. Yet, the depreciation is slightly higher. 6.3% for the base models and 5% for the S's. The C's lost 3.9%. A good result because they're on average only 2 years newer than the S's. The R models are of course a lot more expensive, but depreciated at a similar rate. Base Rs lost 5.1% and Pros 4.9%, a slight improvement from the previous years. Data for the current generation is still accumulating, but the first results indicate that it won't be pretty. The 55 models lost 14.2%, but it's important to note that the data for June 24 contains only a few cars, so there's some uncertainty in this number. Prices for the SLS AMG are stable again after a correction in 22 and 23. The base market is the largest one and shows an unconfirmed increase of 0.9%. GTs are up by 12.9%, but as you can see from the confidence interval, the price variation is high. And that brings us to perhaps one of the most famous GT markets, the one of the Ferraris. We start with the California. We can see the well-known price pattern that includes increasing prices till the summer of 22 and a decline afterwards. Yet, contrary to other markets, the California market is declining linearly. There's no significant slowdown during 2024. Last year, the T's lost 7.7% and the normal models 8.9%. Not the best result if you're after a value-conscious purchase. Continuing with the Roma, we can see that the depreciation rate is slightly higher. Romas lost on average 12.5% during last year. Moreover, the curve is still fairly linear. But it's important to note that this is an average rate. 2021 Romas, for example, lost only 8.7%, while this was 14.3% for the ones for model year 2023. The Portofino and Portofino M would be logical models to have a look at next, but unfortunately I don't have enough data yet for those models. A little bit more patience is required, they will be included in the next update. Let's continue now with the V12s. A12 prices fell a bit from their introduction, but it seems that they have found their feet. That is, the superfasts. The GTSs are a few years newer and are still depreciating at a rate that we've seen before. Last year they lost 7.8%. For the superfast this is 2.1%, and this latter decrease isn't statistically confirmed, so it can be the result of chance. The curve seems to have flattened. Also F12 prices are stable, but they have been so for a longer period. Since the beginning of 2023, they fluctuated around $270,000. Last year they decreased by minus 0.7%, but this change isn't confirmed. In other words, prices didn't change. Prices for the automatic 599s dipped slightly in 2023, but seem to have recovered now. They're up by 3.1% compared to last year. Yet, just as in the F12 market, the change isn't statistically confirmed. Now going back even further in the model range, we find the 550 and 575M. These markets are extremely small, so the price trends have a relatively high uncertainty. I'll therefore skip them for now, but we'll get back to them in the Ferrari V12 market update. We'll continue now with the Aston Martin, the V8 Vantage to be precise. 4.3 liter cars flattened out during 2024 and 4.7 liters seem to follow now. There are many different model variations, but there's not always enough supply to show each one of them individually. So let's look at the aggregated trends. 4.3 liters increased by 2.2%, but this increase can be the result of chance. It's clear that prices are stable. 4.7 liter prices are up by 1.6%. This latter increase is also not confirmed. Moreover, we can clearly see that the downtrend is much stronger in the 4.7 liter market than in the 4.3 liter market. There's clearly some flattening going on, but it goes too far to say that this is an actual increase. Prices for the 4 liter version are still decreasing rapidly. They lost 10% during last year. However, and this is important, this is an average number. In the 4 liter Vantage market there's a massive difference between the cars from 2019 and 2023. If we break this trend down by model year, we can see that the cars from 2019 lost only 6.3%, while 2023 cars lost 13%. I'm also tracking the prices for the latest Vantages, but we need to wait a little bit longer to see how the depreciation curve unfolds. But that's not all. I started to track a large part of the Aston Martin market. This includes the DB7, 9, 11, 12, DBS and Vanquish. For most of them more data is needed, but I can already show you what's happening in the DB12 market. Make a guess. It doesn't look too good indeed. Coupes are down by 22%, but it needs to be noted that the first point only contains a handful of cars, so there's some uncertainty in this number. Yet, it's clear that the depreciation most likely will be high. We stay with the Brits for now and have a look at the Jaguars. They form a slightly more affordable alternative to the Vantages. First generation V8s can be found from $30,000 onwards, and prices for the V8 S's have been flat during 2024. In June 25, prices dipped a bit, resulting in a year-over-year decrease of 7.5%. Yet, the drop is on the border of being statistically confirmed, so we need a bit more data to see if this trend change will materialize. Rs and SVRs are a bit newer and still have a higher depreciation rate. Prices for the Rs flattened a bit, but are still down 11.2% compared to last year. For SVRs this is 6.6%. For both of them goes that it becomes increasingly difficult to find clean title examples. Second generation V8s are also dropping, albeit marginally slower than before. P450s are down by 8.4% and Rs by 8.5%. Moving on to the first generation V6s, it are the price trends for the base and S models that are the most reliable. The trends flattened a bit compared to last year, resulting in a yearly depreciation rate of 10.3% in the base market and 3.3% in the S market. The truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. Supply for the P380, 400 Sport and P340s is low, so we need to interpret the rates of -19.5%, -9.6% and 0.4% with care. And that brings us to the 4 cylinders. Despite an age difference, the difference in depreciation rate between the pre- and post-facelift models is relatively minor. The ones from before the facelift are down by 9.3% and the ones from after the facelift by 10.5%. Are you still with me? We'll have a look at a few more models before we aggregate everything up. The C7 Corvette can't be left out. Over here we have the trends for the Stingray, Grand Sports and Z06s. A lot of data is missing, but we can see that they are relatively good buys at the moment. Stingrays lost 4.7%, Grand Sports 2.7% and Z06s gained 1.1%. The latter change isn't statistically confirmed, so this means that the increase can be the result of chance. Nevertheless, a flat development is still an excellent result. Moreover, we can see that prices increased above February's confidence interval for all of the models, a clear indication of market strength. ZR1 prices also have been stable for a long time and fluctuate between $185,000 and $190,000. Last year they lost 2.9%, but this change isn't confirmed, so it's fair to assume a flat price development. Prices in the GT500 market have also been strong since January 24. One could even say that they increased a bit. We're looking at a plus of 3.2% compared to last year. This increase is statistically confirmed. Now I have to say, as someone living in a country with relatively high car taxes, I envy all of you who can buy that kind of performance at those prices. Also, the Mustang Bullitt seems to be creeping up. Prices never left the $40,000 to $50,000 zone and are now up by 3.4% compared to last year. It's a bit in a gray area as to whether or not this change is statistically confirmed. Prices at least didn't decrease. Let's continue now with Toyota. The latest generation Supra is doing surprisingly well. 2 liters are down by 6.6% and 3 liters only 0.4%. The latter result is rather surprising. We can see that prices stopped dropping mid-2024 and are now increasing slightly. The increase is mainly driven by the oldest cars, so the ones from model year 2020. The GR86 is depreciating significantly quicker than the Supras. Last year the depreciation rate was 9.5%, and it doesn't look like these prices will flatten anytime soon. And that brings us to the S2000, a model that has been requested a lot but now finally made it to the channel. I'm missing some data, but the price trend for last year is complete. I don't think that there are any surprises over here. We're looking at a 4.9% increase for the AP2s and a 3% increase for the AP1s. Both increases aren't confirmed, so it seems fair to assume that prices were stable. We'll continue with Nissan. The Z was selling above MSRP for a while, but those days are long gone. Over here we have the price development for the base and Nismo models, split by the used and new cars. Used base models crossed new prices in January 24 and lost 7.5% during last year, slightly less than before. Used Nismos are younger and lost 13.5% during last year. New supply also dropped drastically in April 25. The change in the market composition might therefore explain this strange drop in the green line. Now it would make sense to include the GTR as well. I did start to track the prices, but I think it will only make it to the channel at the end of the year or the beginning of next year. Spoiler alert, prices appear to be stable or might even be going up. For now we'll continue with something more affordable, the MX-5. The NA generation is creeping up slowly, especially the ones in prime condition. Last year prices increased by 5.2%. The NB and NC generations are priced similar to the NA generation. Prices are fairly stable, but of course the younger NC lost more than the NB. The NBs are up by 2.5% and the NC is down by 6.5%. The NDs are losing money at a similar rate as the NCs. On average, the base models lost 6.6% and the RF ones 5.5%. A decent result. Now BMW is a bit absent in this overview despite having a Z4 in the lineup. Also for this model I started to track the prices. Hopefully I can include them in the next update. But for now, let's aggregate everything up and draw some conclusions. We covered a lot of data and charts. Over here we have the aggregated numbers. On average, the models lost 5%. This is slightly more than the market average of 4%, but not significantly more. At the top we find the cars that you should probably avoid if you're a value-conscious buyer. It's no surprise that we find the DB12 and Roma over there. Also the F-types are still depreciating quickly, but especially the V8S's flattened a bit, so it's important to look at the price charts. GR86s and Nissan Zs are perhaps also depreciating slightly more than expected. In the middle area we find the A12, a car for which the curve flattened significantly. Also the result of the Supra is quite surprising, I think. Especially the 3-liter variant displayed a low depreciation rate. If we go down even further we find the C7s and the F12s. We're starting to enter the area of smart purchases from a value perspective. I guess no one is surprised that the F12 and the SLS AMG fall into this category. They're, alas, also unattainable for many of us. The good news is that some of the lowest depreciating cars are relatively affordable. The S2000, older Miatas and Mustangs make up the top 3. Now all of these rates are of course descriptive. They tell us what happened in the past and they do contain some information as what might happen in the future, but they cannot predict the long-term price development, so you need to interpret the rates as such. Also, there are of course many more front-engine models than that we covered in this video. I shared with you which models will be added in the near-term future, but there of course might be some models that you would like to see added but weren't mentioned in the video. Please let me know the name of those models down below in the comment section. If there's a high demand for a certain model, I'll include it in the video. Now if you want to see videos for completely different models, head over to my channel. Over there you'll find detailed market updates for a large variety of cars. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this overview, and I also hope to see you again in 2 weeks for a fresh market update.